Binge the full week of The Ray Taylor Show ad-free over at inspireddisorder.com/plus.
This is The Ray Taylor Show.
Welcome to Top 5 from The Ray Taylor Show, where each week I normally rank movies in a variety of categories, from franchise and subgenre to directors and actors. Usually no film is left unwatched as I break down my top 5 picks. So join me every Sunday for new episodes and get ready to dive into the world of film with Top 5 from The Ray Taylor Show. However, I want to welcome all of you, my friends, my fellow audio explorers, to a very personal episode of Top 5, because today we're venturing into a realm that's close to my heart. Podcasts. The journey is special to me. Not just as a host, but as someone who's been deeply embedded in the podcasting world since 2008. My adventure in podcasting began over a decade ago, and since then, I've had the privilege of producing over 20 different shows, contributing thousands of episodes to the ever-expanding podcast universe. The current lineup of The Ray Taylor Show, as you well know, mostly movie reviews and rankings, as I do generally on this show. And those are a direct reflection of my passions in general for storytelling and my personal connection to the podcasts that I'm about to share with you. Podcasting has been a significant part of my life, providing a platform to express my views, dive deep into the subjects I love, and to connect with the listeners around the globe. It's a medium that allows me to explore the vast landscapes of cinema, among other interests, shaping the content I create and the stories I tell. So as we count down my top 5 podcasts of 2023, know that these selections are not just the result of critical analysis, but are deeply influenced by my own journey in podcasting. They resonate with the core of what I've tried to build, a space for in-depth discussions, unique perspectives, and above all, a shared love for the art of storytelling. These podcasts have stood out for their excellence, innovation, and the way they've captured the essence of what makes audio storytelling so powerful. They reflect on the diversity of my interests, from the intricacies of film critique to the broader cultural discussion that surround the world. Join me now as we explore the podcasts that have not only shaped my year, but also played a part in inspiring the very content I produce on The Ray Taylor Show. Whether you've been with me since the beginning, or just tuning in, this is a celebration of our shared journey through the limitless world of podcasting. We'll get back to the show after this short message. Are you a true fan of The Ray Taylor Show? Do you crave more content, more insight, more of everything that makes this show great? Then Inspired Disorder Plus is exactly what you need. For only $5 a month, transform your listening and viewing experience into something extraordinary. No more waiting, no more ads. Enjoy the full week of episodes of The Ray Taylor Show in both audio and video formats, completely ad-free. But that is just the beginning. You'll get exclusive early access to the Many Faces series. You can dive into our extensive live painting archive. You can enjoy special deals and discounts that are only available to our members. The perks don't just stop there. Delve into an extensive back catalog of over 14 podcasts with over 618 episodes. Get personal posts from Ray Taylor through his blog. That's my blog. That's me. You can expand your horizons with my creative writing section and participate in an Ask Me Anything section where your questions bring life to our community. Ready to step up your game? Visit inspireddisorder.com/plus and join our exclusive club. It's not just content, it's an experience. See you on the plus side. Now let's get back to the show. Let's get it started, shall we, with my fifth favorite podcast of the year, of last year, 2023. This is a show that I found at the very end of 2023, the tail end of 2023. I had heard about it for probably a few months leading up to the fact before I actually subscribed. But I subscribed and instantly was hooked, binged the majority of available episodes. This is a show that is fairly new, only started the past year as well, but it is a welcomed addition to my collection of podcasts that I subscribe to, and it's one that I loved enough to put here at number 5 is the podcast We're Here to Help, which is hosted by Jake Johnson, who is known the actor from New Girl, as well as a voice in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. His co-host is my buddy, Gareth Reynolds, who is also a co-host of The Dollop. He is a stand-up comedian and an actor, not as big of an actor as Jake Johnson, but Gareth has been in a few things here and there. He shows up and stuff. These people, Gareth and Jake, they don't feel qualified to give strangers good advice. Most of their friendship over the last 15 years has been based around dumb bits, but they do, for better or worse, want to try to help people out. Like your friendly local bartender or your tipsy uncle at the family gathering, Jake and Gareth are on the caller's side and try to help each episode. The guys makes several pitches to the caller whose questions range from trivial to serious. With their best attempts of advice, they can promise they can't promise their suggestions will be perfect, but it will be the best they've got. Jake and Gareth also occasionally bring on a friend, a peer, or even an expert to help along the way. So yeah, this is an advice podcast where people call in. And I think they email their issues to the show. If they select them to take on and to try and help, that person will call into their show and they will give them pitches. And it is so much fun. Just list this out of the box thinking that Jake and Gareth have, coming up with interesting, creative solutions to the very many different problems that people have. I really enjoyed it. It's made me laugh really hard. The episodes are pretty short. They're like 30 to 40 minutes long. A single caller an episode is usually one caller. Sometimes it's two. And it's great. There is a video version of the show, which I love. My introduction to podcasts was through iTunes, subscribing to video podcasts back in a time when sites like YouTube were still brand new, when they were limited to like 10 minutes and you couldn't do full HD. But with the technology of podcasts, you could subscribe to, and I did, long format HD shows that would show up as soon as, you'd automatically download as soon as a new episode. So I love video podcasts. I love watching. That's why I have a video element to my podcast. That's why I call this a podcast. But I love to watch these guys, seeing the guests that they've had, some fun guests that they've had. Jake Johnson has had a new movie come out, and he's had a lot of his co-stars from that movie on as guests, and it's one of my new favorite podcasts that I love. It's funny, it's unique. It's people having fun, and Gareth is a good dude. I really enjoy seeing anytime I see him pop up in something. It's always great to see. So coming in at number 5, my fifth favorite podcast of 2023 is We're Here to Help, which is also part of the Headcum Network, which is a network of podcasts, which there may be another show that will show up on this list as well. But let's move on to my fourth favorite podcast of 2023. This is a podcast that I've been into for years. 4 years. This podcast started back in 2014, and I started listening shortly after, and it's for the same reason I got into We're Here to Help. Coming in at number 4, the show, my favorite podcast of 2023, is The Dollop. The Dollop is a podcast hosted since April of 2014, hosted by comedians Dave Anthony and Gareth Reynolds. Each episode centers around an event or a person from history, selected for its humorousness or peculiarity. And typical episodes feature subjects from American history described by Dave Anthony and commented on by Anthony and Reynolds. Basically, Dave tells Gareth a story from American history, and Gareth doesn't know what the story is. And it's these are well-researched history lessons disguised as comedy, which I love. Getting to hear how things have really never changed, how, for instance, how the Republic, or conservatives, I should say, how conservatives have used the same game plan for every marginalized group throughout history, and that their attack on trans people is no different than their attack on just the gay population in general back in like the 80s, and people of color before that. Like, they have used the exact same game plan throughout history, and it's just crazy to hear stories from, the past. And they do shows in like Australia and in the UK, and you'll get stories from those places as well, which are equally as interesting. But yeah, I love this show because it's not only educational, but it's also hilarious. And again, Gareth Reynolds. So Gareth was brought in as a co-host to a show that I used to watch, a podcast that I used to watch called The Naughty Show. Which is hosted by Sam Tripoli, and Gareth was brought in as a co-host. And I love that show. It was one of my favorite shows back early days when I was, only a few years into podcasting. Probably started like around 2010, 2011, right? A couple years after I started. And was a huge fan of it. Dave Anthony was a guest on that podcast and liked Gareth, so he invited Gareth on to his history podcast that he was starting, which initially, The Dollop, was supposed to be Dave reading a story from American history to a new guest every week. And Gareth was so funny on that first episode that he just became the forever guest. And they've had guests on some live shows, and some, I think, kind of non-live shows. They have guests on that every once in a while, but it's generally just Dave and Gareth, and I love it. I was able to meet Gareth and hang out with him back when he was on The Naughty Show, and that's where he was a guest on my old podcasts many times. He was on as a guest, one of our favorite guests to have on, and he's a great dude. He's hilarious. And so I love seeing anything he does. That's what drew me to We're Here to Help. But yeah, The Dollop is great. I mean, history, so necessary to understand history. And without this podcast, I never would have. And now with it, it's great. I love The Dollop. That's why it's here at number 4. Moving on to my third favorite podcast. This podcast is the podcast that this is the first audio podcast I ever subscribed to. Like I said, all the podcasts I subscribed to early on were video podcasts. This was the first audio-only podcast that I subscribed to because one of the co-hosts of the video podcast that I watched, Totally Rad Show, Dan Trachtenberg, the director of Prey, the Predator movie. He was, before a director, he was a podcast host, and he was a guest on this podcast. And because he was a guest on this podcast, I decided to subscribe to this podcast, and I have been with this podcast for the most part, there was a moment where I wasn't subscribed to this show, but it has been the longest running podcast I've subscribed to. The show has evolved in its co-hosts over the years, but is still majority. I mean, it's all about movies, and it's a show that I love, and I'm glad that's still going. That one of the co-hosts wrote a blog on how he produced his show, and that's how I started producing the first Inspired Disorder podcast, which was the second podcast that I ever started to produce. So this podcast has a lot of influence in my journey as a podcaster, and also has to do a lot with my love for movies. And that podcast, coming in at number 3, is the Slash Filmcast, the Filmcast, formerly the Slash Filmcast. This is a podcast, these hardcore geeks, David Chen, Devendra Hardawar, and Jeff Kanata debate and pontificate and delve into the latest films, TV shows, and other entertainment-related items from the past week. Weekly guests include everyday bloggers, webmaster, that's such a long term, webmaster luminaries, film directors, and movie stars from all walks of life. This is one of my favorite movie podcasts. This is the only movie review podcast that I listen to. I love their discussions on film. I don't always agree with them. There are so many times where it's just like, I just agree with Dave. I just agree with Devendra. I tend to line up with Jeff Kanata in regards to his favorite movies of the previous year. We both notably had Bo Burnham's special Inside as our favorite movie of that year, despite the fact that it's technically not a movie. But it was my favorite piece of art and something that I had watched many, many times since, and just an instant classic. So, I don't know. I love this. I've chatted with all of these guys individually via email or social media. I love their views on movies, even if I don't always agree with them. But they're great. I love their chemistry. I love everything about it. And the crazy thing is, Jeff Kanata was not their original third. It's always been Dave and Devendra. But Jeff Kanata came in as a as a replacement for another host that left, which I don't know why they left. That was at a time when I wasn't listening to the show. But when I came back and I saw that Jeff Kanata was the third co-host, my mind was blown, because Jeff Kanata used to be on a podcast called The Totally Rad Show, and he had 2 co-hosts on that show, and one of those co-hosts was Dan Trachtenberg, the director of Prey. And it was the Totally Rad Show that I was watching when I heard about Slash Filmcast, and that Dan Trachtenberg was a guest. And to so many years later to see that Jeff Kanata had joined that team is like worlds colliding in the best way. And I love it. They do an in-depth review for every episode. It's a weekly podcast. They have a Patreon as well as the Dollop does as well. But Slash Film has a Patreon where they do After Dark episodes. You can get ad-free episodes. You can do After Dark episodes. I love the After Dark episodes because I love hearing them talk about anything, really. It doesn't have to just be about movies, but their main feed podcast is weekly. They do a movie review as the highlight, and then it opens up with kind of what they've been watching, news in the industry, things that are going on, any kind of updates, and then it ends with a review, and then followed with a spoiler-filled review. And it's perfect. I love their format. They're professional. They're perfect. The quality of podcasts that they produce is at a level that so many other professional podcasts don't reach, that level of consistency that they do. So on every level, I'm impressed by the Filmcast. David Chen is one of the best podcast hosts in the game. He's so thorough, And I love their chemistry. I love this show. That's why coming in at number 3 is The Film Cast. Let's take a brief intermission from the show. Imagine, dear listeners, a piece of art that does more than just decorate a wall. Visualize owning a limited edition print from The Many Faces, a series that melds the beauty of the abstract and the allure of the surreal. Each print is a conversation piece, a slice of artistic wonder in your own home. But what really elevates these prints, they come with my personal signature and unique number, making their authenticity and exclusivity a must. And guess what? Indulging in this art won't empty your wallet. Starting from just $5 for a 4x6-inch print are designed to be accessible, fitting both your space and your budget. To art enthusiasts, collectors, or anyone who cherishes one-of-a-kind pieces, this is your moment. Transform your living space with a touch of artistic elegance. Head on over to inspireddisorder.com to select your exclusive limited edition prints today. And now let's return to the show with that extra bit of inspiration. Moving on to my top 2 favorite podcasts of 2023. Let's get into it. Starting with number 2, this is a show that I subscribed to, I think back in Denver, maybe. It's a show that's been around. I think they started around 2015 or 2016. And it's a show that once I started listening to it, like I had heard the hosts of this show had been guests on another podcast that I listened to a lot called Doug Loves Movies, which is hosted by Doug Benson. And it's a trivia game show. Comedians and actors come on and play movie-related trivia. A lot of the hosts from this show that's here at number 2 were guests on that. And eventually, like always, it always takes a while. I hear about a show. I like guests. I'm like, I should check out this show. Finally checked out this show. Such a unique idea. Fell in love with it. Have listened to it religiously every episode that comes out, every weekly thing. They have a Patreon as well with a lot of other content. But their main feed podcast is the one I absolutely love, and love it so much that I've literally gone through and binged the entire catalog, right? This is from 2016 to present day, weekly episodes multiple times. I have at least twice I have gone through, and then this is also the podcast that I am most likely to play when I paint live, when I do my paintings on YouTube, because don't have to worry about copyright. It's a good time listening to these guys. The episodes are usually around 2 hours long, which I love a good long episode in a podcast. But that podcast coming in at number 2 is All Fantasy Everything. I love this show so much. All Fantasy Everything is a show where funny people and experts come together to fantasy draft pop culture, from music to movies to sandwiches. Everything is in play. So this podcast, hosted by Ian Carmel, co-hosts Sean Jordan and David Bory. All three are stand-up comedians. Living in L.A., Oregon, and Denver currently. They used to all live in L.A. During the pandemic when shit hit the fan. A lot of people moved out of L.A., moved kind of back to where they were from. That's why Sean Jordan in Oregon and David Bory in Denver. Ian Carmel stayed in LA, but they're great. They have guests on all the time. Usually every episode has a guest on, which is usually another comedian, and they draft things based on a topic. So one of the episodes was drafting Taco Bell menu items. Another one was drafting an entourage, people that you would want in an entourage. Another episode was drafting months One of the most recent ones, what was this week? This week was they were drafting. Oh, they only got halfway through for the first time ever. They had Moshe Kasher on, and or Moshe Kesher, and they were drafting subcultures because Moshe just released, who's a comedian, released a book about different subcultures that he's grown up in, from the deaf community, comedy community, rave community. I think maybe AA or addiction is one of them. But they only got like 2 or 3 picks in, and it's just such a fun show, lighthearted. There's positive. They make a joke after they passed their 300th episode that they were going to go right wing. So if you listen to it now and they joke about that, that's just a joke that they're after the 300th episode, they're all following in Joe Rogan's footsteps and just going right wing like so many comedians have. But they're very much libtards like myself. And I love it. It's my favorite show. I love it so much. I listen to it. It's probably the show that I've listened to, like re-listened to episodes the most. Like there are episodes I've probably listened to like 4 or 5 times. And they're just great. They do yearly pop culture drafts. They are one of the reasons I started doing this show. Before this show, Top 5, was primarily about movies, I drafted a lot of the topics that they did on All Things Fantasy, or All Fantasy Everywhere, just because I love the show so much and I wanted to have my rankings of movie treats or whatever. So yeah, one of the inspirations for me creating Top 5 and one of my favorite shows of all time is coming in here at number 2, All Fantasy Everything. Shaklackety! Moving on to my favorite podcast of all time. This is a show that I subscribed to during the pandemic, again, because one of the co-hosts of a show that I subscribed to was a guest on this podcast. 2 of them were, actually. And after the second person was a guest on it and they recommended it, it's like, okay, I got to check this podcast out. And it's a podcast related to movies, but also in some ways related to All Fantasy Everything. But done in a way that is so unique and so fun. It's a show that I've literally binged every episode only once. And a show I love because the episodes can be very long. Like a regular episode is like close to 3 hours. A long episode for this podcast is close to like 8 hours. Like, I don't know what their longest is, maybe 6 hours, but they get long. And this show that I absolutely love for so many different reasons, and I'm so glad I found it. And there may be spoilers if you're watching my show right now, at the shirt that I'm wearing, because coming in at number 1 is Screen Drafts. This is a podcast where experts and enthusiasts competitively collaborate on the creation of screen-centric best of lists. This is hosted by Clay Keller and Ryan Marker, who are 2 massive movie people living in LA. One of them is a manager of a repertory movie theater. They both used to work at Vidiot's, which is like a famous film archive movie rental place in LA. They have all kinds of people that are, like, when they say experts and enthusiasts, they have people that know what they're talking about. They put everybody else who talks about movies to shame, this podcast. And that's one thing I love. Not only is it a show where they talk about movies, but they talk about movies. This show is the other motivation and inspiration for me starting Top 5. All Fantasy Everything and Screen Drafts were the 2 shows that got me started on Top 5. And Screen Drafts is the reason why Top 5 has turned into more of just movie rankings. Because I love hearing them talk about movies, but they're talking about movies in a specific category. Either it's movies by a specific director or some weird subgenre. It is the best movie conversations by people that have seen it all. For the most, they've seen so much movies, and I've gotten so many movie recommendations from watching this show, listening to this show. I think they have a video aspect of it now, but it's one that I only listen to. All of these podcasts, by the way, are podcasts that I listen to, but some may have video elements as well. But yeah, Screen Drafts, it's great. The long ones, like they did one where they wanted to draft every single Marvel movie in the entire MCU, and that took, I think that was I think maybe they did it in a single thing, but that was probably one of their longest drafts. They've also done like drafting all of the Pixar films. I love it. It's a show that I love so much that I've become a member of their Patreon page, and they have so much content on there that's even different. It's all movie related, but I love all of their Patreon stuff. Like they do reviews of Criterion movies. They do 5 movie franchise drafts. They do all kinds of different fun stuff over on their Patreon page. But yeah, Screen Drafts is like the best. Like if you're the type of person that loves movies to where you have the Criterion Channel app, you should check out Screen Drafts. Like it is a movie lovers movie podcast for sure. And the format of it being competitively collaborative means the gameplay of it adds so much drama where people, like, they're trying to make a top 7 list in a normal episode, and people will take turns adding movies to that list, right? And they don't know what each other wants to try and put on the list, right? And if somebody doesn't like a movie that you put on, if they have available, they can veto it, and that movie gets thrown off. So they have to agree on some level, and there's so much controversy. Like it is, the listening to the drama of the episodes is just as much, if not more, fun than the in-depth movie discussions that they have on this show. I absolutely love Screen Drafts. It is it's one of the other shows that I put on while I paint. One, because they're long episodes. I will re-listen to episodes like I've listened to I've listened to every single episode from Screen Drafts, and almost everything on their Patreon page. And a lot of the stuff that they've talked about, I haven't seen. So when I complete a franchise, especially if I'm ranking it, I will go back and re-listen to an episode with the new knowledge of what my opinions are on my rankings, and there are some that are mind-blowing. Like this show, Screen Drafts, illustrates perfectly how art is subjective and how movies are no different. The subjective nature of what people like in movies and what movies people like is insane, especially amongst people who value movies at a level that most people don't. You would think that the elite movie snobs would all have the same viewpoints on all of the same movies, but they do not. There are some loose cannons in this show, like a Billy Ray, who I absolutely love. And Billy Ray, only the tip of the iceberg as far as the loose cannons. You never know what they're gonna pick. I love it. It's up here at number 1 for all of those reasons. Coming in number 1, my favorite podcast of 2023 is Screen Drafts. Honorable mentions. As I mentioned earlier, Doug Loves Movies is another great show that has been on my top 5 list in previous years, and is a show that has gotten me through some really rough times. Doug Loves Movies is like one of those all-timers. And for whatever reason, I think it's just because I've been through so much and with the show. I still enjoy it, but it's not as, like, Doug Loves Movies used to be a show that I re-listened to episodes all the time. But yeah, still a great show. Doug Loves Movies, hosted by Doug Benson, stand-up comedian. Obviously, This American Life is great. Radio Lab is great. Those I don't listen to all the time. They're kind of my brain food podcasts, but yeah, those are my honorable mentions. But yeah, let me do my list one more time and we'll get out of here, shall we? This is my top 5 podcasts of 2023. Starting off with number 5 is We're Here to Help, hosted by Jake Johnson and Gareth Reynolds. Number 4 is The Dollop, hosted by Dave Anthony and Gareth Reynolds. Number 3 is The Filmcast, hosted by David Chen, Devendra Hardawar, and Jeff Kanata. Number 2 is All Fantasy Everything, hosted by Ian Carmel, Sean Jordan, and David Borey. And my number 1 favorite podcast of 2023 is Screen Drafts, hosted by Clay Keller and Ryan Marker. My number 1 movie. I would love to hear your favorite podcast recommendations. Obviously, I love movies. Hit me up with any movie podcast recommendations. I would love to hear them. Also, any podcasts in general, I love them. I used to be a huge subscriber to comedy podcasts. For many years, was a huge comedy nerd. And sadly, during the pandemic, a lot of those comedians leaned in the same direction as Joe Rogan. And was a real bummer to hear so many podcasts just go hardline conservative all of a sudden, or at least adopt many hardline conservative values. I just purged them. And these are the tried and true ones. But I'd love to hear what podcasts that you love, your top 5. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on social media. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Top 5 from The Ray Taylor Show. I do hope you enjoyed my ranking and analysis of my top 5 podcasts of last year. Let me know how you would rank your favorite podcasts. Are there any that I should check out? And join the conversation by leaving a comment or rating on your favorite podcast platform or over on youtube.com/inspireddisorder, where all these are available in video format. And don't forget to tune in next week for another episode, and see you again next week for more Top 5. Subscribe to The Ray Taylor Show on YouTube and everywhere podcasts are found. Binge the full week ad-free over at inspireddisorder.com/plus. Purchase Ray Taylor Show merch over at inspireddisorder.com. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Peace out!
Today is the day where you wake up and you realize that everything that you've been dreaming about, everything that you've been wanting, every goal and wish and hope that you've ever had can become real. Dreams can come true. What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.